From the Ticats Audio Network, this is Ticats Today with Louis Butko.
Yes, it is Ticats Day for a Friday, November the 11th, Remembrance Day, as we remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for protecting our freedom here on Remembrance Day and on Ticats Today. And thanks for joining us on the Ticats Audio Network. And all week I have been very coy in what has been going on here on the show. I've kind of been teasing that this is going to be the last episode, but after a couple of conversations, I think there's still more to talk about. And, I thought we were going to get CFL All-Star announcements. And, of course, I want you to hear from those guys who will probably, maybe, hopefully be named CFL All-Stars. So we don't have that news yet. It's Friday afternoon. So, let's come back next week. We can set up the Grey Cup. And I'm sure there's lots of news that's going to come out of Grey Cup week as well. So we're coming back. So I know I've been teasing that this is the last show and we're closing the book, but not quite. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes here of Ticats Today, and appreciate your support and for listening to this one and all season long, and hopefully you'll continue to listen. Coming up on today's show, in fact, right now, very pleased to be joined by Mike Daly, who is the only person in the Ticats Audio Network history to dress, at least in practice, after signing with the team a few weeks ago. And now, again, a Ticats Audio Network analyst. And Mike, take us through the last few weeks. What's this experience been like for you?
Honestly, chaos. It was absolute chaos. Those the last 2 weeks. Like I said, Drew had called me, 2 weeks ago, midweek, and was like, "Hey, are you looking to do this?" Said, "Yeah, let's do it." Like I told you. But honestly, I didn't realize how much time it would take, because I knew the practice schedule, I knew all that kind of stuff. But it was my job outside of that. So having to go right from there, going to Drew Alameng's office to do some of my sales calls or whatever it might be. And then if it was busy, doing that, I'd be at the stadium until about 5 o'clock, and then have to drive and go coach at Laurier because I was still doing that. So it was chaos for a little bit, but it was so much fun, man. It was fun to be back. It was fun to be out there on the field. It was like I hadn't left some of the guys that I had good relationships with before. As soon as I stepped in, it felt like I'd been there all year. So it was fun in that aspect. Busy, but definitely fun and enjoyable.
I know it was worth it for you, because I was down there a couple of times where Sam brought the kids, and I know you and I talked about it before, but what was that experience like, getting to see those guys go on the field and just, them being at an age where, at least they'll have these memories of seeing dad, lace them up.
Yeah. And, we had talked about it before, but I guess what I didn't realize is that, before, when I'd bring them on the field during the whole COVID thing, I'd bring them out there. But they were too young. Like, my oldest was 3 at the time, so he didn't really remember all that much. But now, since they've been on the field, that's all they've really talked about. So anytime they see me wearing something Ticats, or they have they'll see a picture, because Bob was out there, our photographer, and he took awesome photos that we didn't even know. So I have all those, which is cool memories to show them. But they've been talking about that since, and that's. For the season not going the way we wanted it to, and everything, when you take a 30,000-foot view at it, it's like, that was pretty cool to be able to get that when, they'll be able to remember.
Yeah. And like I said, with the craziness going on with Laurier and the tough loss last week, but I'm sure Sam deserves a lot of credit at home for keeping the peace for a little craziness over the last few weeks. So let's go into the locker room. What did you learn about this team? You had obviously followed it pretty close, but being in there, what were your main takeaways?
Yeah, it's that was the first thing that I wasn't sure what it was going to feel like when you're going back in there. Like I said, it's fairly normal. Same leaders were still there, all that kind of stuff. But I heard Coach O and kind of everybody really say this after the game, and what we talked about is there was this belief in the team, and maybe that's because it was such a hot streak at the end of the season. It's just really too bad it didn't work out, but there was this belief in the team, where it was like, we talked about that last field goal, and we were like, everybody still believed that we would block that last field goal. You know what I mean? And so that was throughout the entire locker room. What was the tough part was it was because it was such an up and down season. From what I've been hearing, it's very hard to be in such a good mood and such a good mindset that entire season, right? So when you're in the dumps and it's not going well, to pull yourself back out, it's really hard to get over that mindset of, oh no, are we getting back into this again? And at the end of the season, when I came in, you didn't really see that at all. So I think the best part about that team is that there was that belief at the end because they were doing so well. But really, when it comes down to it, it's just a couple execution errors that really ended up being that Montreal final, right?
And it always comes back to it takes a team to win, it takes a team to lose. Like let's not completely discount the fact that Montreal was a good team. They played well defensively. They made the better adjustments. Well, I mean, you can make the argument the Ticats made the better adjustments in the second half. Again, like you said, maybe just execution. Back to that belief, that has to start though with a sense of calmness, almost like where guys aren't going at each other, where we talked about this with Luke earlier this week, where you've been in rooms, you can be in rooms because there are so many people in the locker room, and if the defense is playing really well and another unit's not, it could be easy to get on each other. This team never did, or at least that's what we got the sense of. What was the key to that in your perspective of maintaining the peace for the most part and making sure that this unit stays a unit?
Yeah, I think it was, you got to go back to the leadership portion. So that's including Coach O, that's including Butler, Mark Washington, Tommy Condell. Like those names, those guys, they've been around for a long time. So they've been through those experiences where, it's not going well and then it's going well. And they've been through that. So if your leaders and the people at the top are staying calm like they were, everybody kind of follows suit like, oh, okay, maybe it's really not as bad as we think. You know what I mean? Maybe these losing streak isn't as bad as we think. And then when it gets hot, when it's like, okay, we got to keep focusing, keep, next play that we talk about, then it's one of those things like, okay, can't get too high, right? I think where there was a little disconnect is with a lot of the new players. It just takes some time for them to get used to the Ted Laurents and the Simonis, what they know about the long seasons, about the playoffs, and just kind of how to practice and really being able to, focus and keep guys prepared practicing wise. And it's that thing you always hear where it's be an all-star in your role. And I think that's with some of the young guys where they'll just learn that as it goes along. And that was kind of a theme, is that there was some all-stars in their role, and then there's some guys still trying to figure that out.
One of those all-stars, I mean, Micah Johnson was fantastic, but Jovan Santos Knox, really up the middle. You can go, the guys up the middle with Micah, Jovan, and Tunde. But a lot of guys I've talked to have, praised what Jovan was able to do as a leader this year. You being there, you having a front row seat in the meeting rooms, on the field, what did you take away from him, and how was he maybe different than what you saw last year?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's much different with him. I mean, he is as consistent as a player as there is, right? And you see it when you watch. Well, you actually don't see it when you watch the game, but it's just like, oh, good tackle, gain of one, and you're like, oh, there's Jovan again, and then another one, oh, a gain of 1 or 2, oh, there's Jovan again. He's just consistently making these tackles that they don't flash too much at any point, but he's consistent at doing it. I think where there was a little bit of growth that I saw was just that he has a little more hold of the defense. So last year came in, that's a tough thing to do, especially Mark Washington's defense, where there's a lot of, player accountability in terms of getting people set up and in the correct spot. Jovan's just that one step in. So really, once you get more and more comfortable with somebody's defense, then it's, you're almost playing without thinking at that point. So I think that was the big change for Jovan, because you really saw him being comfortable out there.
Ted mentioned this too. He was proud of himself for being more vocal this year as a leader. And he said, coach had challenged him. Teddy's always been a quiet guy. You've been around him a lot. Was that something you noticed? Did that stand out to you? Because there were even times I saw, when Kay Okafor switched back over or switched to the D line, I saw a lot of one-on-one with Teddy's. What did you see firsthand from, again, a veteran guy, someone this season in that limited time you were with him?
Yeah, Ted, I mean, like you said, Ted is a man of very, very few words. And, but he is very good with the young guys, right? They have, every position group has their meeting rooms and stuff like that. And once you kind of dwindle that down to just the defensive meeting room, he's as vocal as it comes, right? You won't see it on the field. You won't see it, kind of in the big team setting or anything like that. But when it comes down to that small room, him and Dylan Wynn are about as vocal as they can be. Now, I know when you look at it from the outside, Dylan Wynn and Teddy Laurent are completely opposite people, right? But once you narrow it down in that D-line group, Ted is a wealth of knowledge, obviously. And honestly, you could see him just the re-energization because, he got a lot of second down reps that he didn't get last year. And you could see him being an impact player on the pass. So it was cool to see Ted, a little re-energized, but also just being the same old Ted that he was.
And rising to the moment, really, because when Dylan went down, he did have to step up and he did have to start, and he looked like Ted that we've seen, the Ted we've known and the Ted that we've consistently seen. What was it like for you coaching and playing at the same time? Like, what was that? Like, how were you in your head? And I know that the Ticats brought you on for some leadership too. So what was that like that, in the morning you'd be listening to orders, you'd be getting yelled at by your coaches, and then in the afternoons you'd be flipping it and doing the opposite?
Yeah, I would just take out whatever was yelled at me on the players.
What was that thing Butt said to me that really stuck with me, that really hurt? Like, I want to do that to one of my players later.
Honestly, it was what was cool about it was that all the players, once they caught wind that I was going to go play again, they were pretty jacked up for me, obviously. Yeah. The only thing that really changed, because we were in playoff mode ourselves at Laurier, right? Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that none of this was taking focus off of them and their prep. But the one thing that did change is I used to race them in between each drill. So we would go from individual drill to Skelly. And as soon as the whistle would blow, I'd take off and try to race every one of them there. As soon as I signed, I was like, okay, can't risk a hamstring pull, can't risk any of that kind of stuff. So the whistle would blow. And for the first week, they didn't know that I was going to resign or anything like that until it came out. So I would take off, or they would all take off, and I'd just be jogging. I'd be like, I'm going to take it easy this week, guys. So that was really the only thing that changed.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, man. What did that motivate you to, obviously signing late? You want to get back out there, don't you? I can see you putting in an effort to hit the field next year.
I can always play. At least in my mind, I can always play. I told you this initially, or maybe it was Milt that I told this to, but he was like, are you ready to go right now? Yeah, absolutely. I'm always ready to go. I'll always stay in shape. If somebody needs me, for sure. I don't think I can do that chaos for an entire season. Number one, I'd be sleeping on a couch somewhere outside. I'd imagine I'd get kicked out. Probably lose my job, whatever it might be. But can't do that chaos for an entire season. If it's that playoff run, sure, always. Yeah. But that chaos that's too long for an entire season.
Let's go back to the bigger picture of the 2022 Ticats season. I mean, turnovers is going to be the story that at the end of the day, we'll remember that minus 23, minus 24 turnover ratio. You can't expect to win games. But what impressed you about this season overall? What did you take away? And I know your perspective may have changed on a few things being in the room, but generally, what do you think, other than turnovers, we're going to look back on this season and think, well, what could have been?
Yeah, I mean, the turnovers were a lot of that negative 23 or whatever that you hear. That's kind of the beginning part of the season. I think what I'll end up taking away from this season is that at the end, with them doing so well, they were in the positives, right? The Ticats, they were in the positives, doing well in that turnover category. I think the tough part was Dane just trying to find himself again a little bit, right? And you saw it happen at the end, and he'll even be open and admit that early on just didn't feel like himself. And, he's such a competitor, and when you want to do as well as, as perfect as he wants to be all the time, it's a tough thing to go through that. So I think really when you look at this, it's that battle and being consistent and, just kind of that fight that was at the end of that season. I mean, I know it didn't work out for Montreal. They had some good stuff that they put in, though, we weren't fully expecting, and they executed well. Trevor Harris looked like, old Trevor Harris, but the fight was still there all the time. And there's a lot of new pieces that are going to help this Ticats team, kind of down the road.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, some of the younger guys, like you look at the way that special teams group, and that one's kind of the important part to look at, because that's where the young Canadians are going to develop and become the guys we know. What did you take away? Because it was tough losing a guy like Curtis Newton in that unit, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he is as good of a leader as they come. And when you don't have him out there on the field, it's noticeable. And I think, when we talk about injuries, as much as we talk about Braylon, as much as we talk about Dylan Wynn, Curtis Newton's right up there in terms of guys who were important this season who weren't out there. So what did you take away from that younger group? And what do you feel like is the potential for some of the guys in that group?
Yeah, you hit it right on the head there. It's like, when you lose a guy like Dylan Wynn, it's very noticeable, right? Because you're like, wow, he makes a lot of plays on defense. When you lose a guy like Braylon Addison, 1,000-yard receiver, makes a ton of plays. Curtis Newton is exactly right there with those guys. What you don't end up seeing is that what he is, or a type of guy that he is that second coach. So Butler will be up there explaining things. Everybody's going to trust Butler. Yeah, absolutely. But then when it gets down to it, players always have, okay, how are we exactly going to do this? Butler, he gave us this framework of how we're going to do it. Now we have to figure out how we're going to do it together specifically. That's where those leaders like Curtis Newton step in really nicely, right? Because they're able to take what Butler said, understand it, be able to change that up. So really what I ended up seeing was these young guys having to step up quick and get into that role, right? Like a Bailey Feltmate having to step up into getting that role, right? Sean Thomas Erlington and honestly, Felix. Felix was a fantastic addition to that special teams unit, because he kind of had taken those reins and was like, okay, this is where we're gonna win a lot of games. And then I'll tell you what, it's nice to have a guy like Lawrence Woods back there, because I don't know what it is. He just bounces off people that are trying to tackle him. He just runs hard, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of ways to go for this special teams unit, but it was cool to see those young guys, at least that were, first years when I was still playing, really step up and be those leaders early on.
Well, and to that point, I feel like, there was a little bit of a passing of the torch last year with you and Curtis. So what was it like for you to see this guy who you had played with for, the previous few years take this role and really succeed in it? Because it's tough to be a leader. It is an honor to be unanimously named a captain, right? I mean, that's what he was, captain of special teams. What did you see in his development?
Yeah, it was just honestly, some guys just take it because that's how they play, right? And for Curtis, he was one of those guys that, when he was out there, he's like, no, I need to understand what everybody's doing. So I'll explain to everybody what everybody's doing so that I know what I need to do. You know what I mean? And that's what he did. And it was just one of these things that all of a sudden he started doing that and everyone started listening. So then you just keep doing it and keep doing it. And then next thing you know, all of a sudden everyone's like, okay, what next? You know what I mean? And he became that kind of guy. And I think, down the road, when you look at a guy like Felix or Sean or a guy like Nick Cross, who the Ticats missed a lot, right? Yeah. Guys like that, I think, one of them will just elevate to that position again, right? That, Curtis Newton was, where it's once you start saying things, everyone's like, yeah, cool, that sounds good. What else? Yeah. Right. And then that's kind of how it goes.
Jake Burt, I mean, he was a big guy on special teams to start the year. They lost him. As much as turnovers of the story, and players, coaches will never make excuses for injuries, because injuries are a part of the game. But that I think is what we look back on this year, on what could have been. And you look at the amount of games lost by key guys like Curtis and Dylan and Braylon and Dane, throughout the year battling injuries. It's going to be what could have been. I'm glad that I saved the best for last, and that's no offense to the rest of my guests, but very few analysts on the Ticats Audio Network actually, dressed in practice this season. So you were the perfect guest to wrap up the season, man. Thank you. Now, I hope your life calms down a little bit the next few weeks here.
Yeah, it has already. So it's chilling from here on out.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Have a great off season.
Thanks, Louis. Always good talking.
My thanks to Mike Daly, Ticats, I was about to say former Ticats, but he finished the year with the team, and former Ticats Audio Network analyst, for joining me. And you heard there at the end, I said he was my last guest of the year. That's not true, because if you were with us off the top, you heard that we're coming back next week. So I hope you have a great weekend. Looking forward to talking to you on Monday. Thanks for checking us out here on the Ticats Audio Network. I'm Louis Butko, hoping you have a great day.
Ticats Today can be heard every weekday, and we would like to hear from you. Email us at gameday@ticats.ca. Have a question or an opinion? We want to hear it. That's gameday@ticats.ca. Subscribe to the Ticats Audio Network on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.